Howdy folks, John here from rchelicopterfun.com. As you can see, today we're going to be looking at the OMP Hobby M2 helicopter, specifically the V2 version here. I have already done reviews on the V1, last year's model, and this year's Explorer version, which is the lower spec model of the two. And if you wanted to see those, I'll have links below in the description. And as I had said in both of those videos, I consider the M2 pretty much the neatest little 200 size heli on the market right now. It's just an amazing little machine, primarily because of the direct drive rotor system. So efficient, so quiet, and so robust. And seeing that I've already done reviews on these two, I don't want to go over the same thing again. So what I thought we'd do with the V2 is just compare it between the two to see what the differences are. Answer some common questions that are coming up both on my website and on my YouTube channel. And then we will just go out and fly it. I'm not going to talk at all while flying it. Just let the heli do the talking itself. You'll hear how quiet it is and just see how smooth and nice of a flyer these little M2s are. As I often say, it does fly bigger than it is. It feels more like a 450 in the way it responds and everything. You know, a lot of it is dependent on setup, but yeah, they're just amazing little machines. So let's get into it. I want to thank Dale at Buddy RC and OMP Hobby for sending me the M2 V2 so we can all have a look at it together. As usual, there will be product links down below in the description if you want to check one of these little rascals out for yourself, look at the specs, all that good stuff. OMP Hobby's M2s come nicely packaged in these foam boxes, which really help protect the helicopter, and double as a carrying case and storage box. They've got this cardboard sleeve around them with nice bright graphics. This year's V2 versions come in 3 color formats. We've got Charm Orange, which is the same as last year. That's what we've got here today that we're looking at. You can also get it in this dull purple, but it's actually a really bright popping fluorescent pink. And just like last year's V1 version, they've got the racing yellow, which is this really bright fluorescent yellow. And that's what I like about the M2s. They've picked nice, bright, popping colors, really easy to see in the sky. Just helps with orientation, which on a small heli is a good thing. Like I said, the box itself really protects and holds the helicopter well. Good protection here. It's just hinged at the back. And when you open it up, you just see the presentation. It's so awesome. The camera isn't picking up this orange, I'm sure, but it's such a bright popping fluorescent orange. It's going to be so easy to see. And one of the first things we can see the difference between the V2 version and the Explorer version, they've color anodized the motor halves and the tail rotor end plate to match the canopy. On the Explorer version, you just get the black anodized motor and the silver end plate. The heli itself, the battery's already in it, so it does come with one LiPo pack. We'll look at that when we take the canopy off. Speaking of the canopy, let's just have a really close look at this so you can appreciate the paint quality, and the fiberglass quality is a fiberglass canopy, but as you can see, the lines are really crisp, no running at all. I can't see any fisheye or any dust specks in the clear coat. There's no sanding marks. So really high quality paint job on this fiberglass canopy. And the heli itself, it just screams quality. There's nothing cheap feeling or looking about it. Lots of carbon fiber, lots of CNC machined aluminum parts. Very high quality little birds. So we got some spare parts. We've got a spare main rotor shaft, a spare head axle or feathering shaft. You get 3 spare servo arms if you crack or cam out a servo arm, and some spare screws and a few zip ties. And there's a little bag of desiccant in here. And the only other thing we've got in here is the M2 flight controller settings manual, and that's the biggest change between the V2 and the Explorer version this year over last year's V1 version. You can actually access the flybarless unit or flight controller to make adjustments to the speed, the agility, and the gains of all 3 axes. Gyros, probably the best feature though that I think is you can actually recenter your servo arms. So if you had to replace a servo gear set or a servo and the servo arm was no longer perfectly level, you can go into the flight controller and adjust that servo arm so it's back to being perfectly level, get your swash plate perfectly level, everything's nice and trim and you're ready to go again. Canopies on these little guys are just held on with two canopy pegs, these little grommets, and then at the bottom front there's a little tongue on the fiberglass canopy that slides into a little slot here on the landing struts. And the landing struts on this year's version of the V2 and of course the Explorer, they're these flexible nylon ones, a lot harder to break over last year's carbon ones, which if you came down really hard, they were quite easy to crack. And we'll get into the battery first, seeing that's one of the most common questions that come up. The batteries are held on these little carbon trays that are just slid into the frame, and you release them with this little catch. What the hell? The carbon of this catch is already cracked. Must just be a defect on this one because the Explorer version never noticed that. But yeah, here's the carbon is cracked on this catch. Really flimsy. And that's one of the things I don't like about this year's version over last year's version. They are using thinner carbon fiber plate. They're using 7.75 millimeter plate. Last year's were 1 millimeter carbon plate. So stiffer carbon on last year's. And the other thing is these frames were a little bit taller. So you could fit a taller battery in last year's version over this year's. And again, that's one of the most common questions that's coming up is battery size. So I'm going to show you what size you can play with for different brands of batteries. You don't have many options because there's not many out there that are this size. So I'm just going to slide the plate back in. So probably your biggest dimension limitation is going to be height from the top or from the plate right to the top of the landing strut here. We've got about 26 millimeters. Now take into account another layer of Velcro in there. So I'd say the tallest you could go would be 25. Width is 25 as well. And length, you've got a little more wiggle room, of course, because you can come out a little bit further out the front. You've got a little bit of room up in the canopy. But these are about a 60 millimeter long battery. Now with that said, that these are shorter, there is one thing, however. Last year's version had these metal spacer bars up here, and this year's version doesn't have that. The carbon plate, they've just got a plastic tray. So that's a little bit of a cost savings over last year's V1 version. But with that tray there, you could just put a piece of Velcro in there. Don't even use the plate. And you could get, here's a 850 size pack that I use on my two T-Rex 250s. And it is 30 millimeters tall. But if I was to put some Velcro on the top and a piece of Velcro up there, I could just get it in. But then, of course, you don't have the tray. And yeah, you'd have to wrap a piece of Velcro all the way around the battery and the flight controller. So it's not the best idea. You'd have to be concerned if it wasn't tight enough that it could slide back and hit the Outrunner motor here. But this would fit if you didn't want to use the tray. So that's the plus with these, even though they're shorter. You've got more room in there because the different plate up here doesn't have those metal spacer bars. Now the biggest cost difference in savings, because these are $70 less, these ones are $350 for the V2 version, these are $280 American, are the servos. The Explorer version uses a plastic housed servo, and these ones use an aluminum housed servo. So the servo cost alone almost makes up for half of the price difference, around 35, 40 bucks. And you've got a full metal swash plate on the V2 version. You've got a phenolic or composite fiber reinforced bottom plate, but still metal on the top. But what I've noticed, I've been flying this quite a bit. It's not going to pick it up on camera, but I'm developing a little bit of slop in the swash halves on these. And on my original V1, that's never happened with the full metal. So I imagine the full metal V2 version, no different. It's the same swash plate. And the other big difference, of course, this year on both versions, they've gone to the aluminum boom over the carbon fiber boom that was on last year's V1 version. And another change on the V2 over the Explorer, they've got a metal blade grip and metal arm, whereas these again are a plastic. And if you saw the review I had on this one, this thing, I had a mistake with it, and these just shattered. There's no strength at all. This is the weakest link, these blade grips. So going with the metal blade grip, you're going to get away from that. But otherwise, they're identical helicopters. They fly. I can't, the type of flying I do, I can't feel any difference between the Explorer and the V2 version. You know, the metal case servos, that's pretty much eye candy. Same with the anodized motor and M plate. The biggest improvement, though, on this that I think is worthwhile are the metal blade grips. Now, the next most common question that comes up is connectivity. What radios will these hook up to? Because they only come in a bind-to-fly version. No radio comes with them. So you can get OMPHobby's radio. It's a non-computerized radio. And you know my thoughts on non-computerized radios and collective pitch helicopters. Don't even waste your time or money, because everything about collective pitch is setting the things up. The setup on these out of the box isn't bad, but you can certainly improve it to your flying style. As far as all the parameters in here, as far as speed and agility, you've got a scale of 1 to 9. They're set at 5, the midpoint, and I find that's pretty much ideal. If you run dual rates, though, you could dial the speed up a little bit higher and then run lower dual rates if you want to tame it down. But yeah, start off with the factory settings. They're very good for most people, but if you find the thing's not, flipping or rolling or yawing quick enough, you can dial it up. And if it's too fast, just go into your computerized radio and use more dual rates on your primary dual rate channels, aileron, elevator, and rudder. Or if we're using correct heli terms, cyclic pitch, roll, and tail rotor. This flight controller uses a built-in receiver and a special OMP Hobby protocol. So their radio is the only one that will work with the built-in receiver. We'll get to that in a bit, though, because there's a workaround. As far as other receivers, you can hook it up to DSMX, so Spectrum or any aftermarket radio that uses DSMX, and you would plug a little remote satellite receiver into it. And if you saw my review on the Explorer version, that's initially how I had it running. I had it on a little Spectrum receiver that I mounted underneath and was running it off of DSM2 or DSMX, just plugged it into there. You can also run it off of S-Bus. So if you run Futaba SFHSS, if you run FR Sky, any receiver with an S-Bus output that you could plug into here, you can do it that way. And on my original M1, that's what I was running. I'm running this little SFHSS S-Bus receiver on it. So S-Bus, Spectrum DSM2 or DSMX, or OMP protocol. And OMP now is supported by multi-protocol. So if you've got a multi-protocol radio, an OpenTX radio with the multi-protocol module, like a Radiomaster TX16S, a Jumper 16 or 18, or even if you've got a different brand radio, here's my Horus, with an external multi-protocol module. Multi-protocol now supports OMPHobby's protocol, and I had done an entire video on setting that up, which I will link to below if you're curious about that. So I've just got to bind this thing to this radio. The little M2 V2 bound up fine to my TX16S through the internal OMP protocol receiver and the flight controller. As far as setup goes on the heli, straight out of my setup and tips ebook for anyone who's got that. This is nothing new. Out of the box, as we would come to expect on all of OMP's helicopters. Mechanical setup is bang on. Swashplate perfectly level, left to right and front to back. So this thing's going to be in pretty much perfect trim off the bench. As far as my collective ranges go, my really tame collective range, 0 degrees, you know that when you fold the blades together. Again, I go over that in my setup and tips ebook, up to about +9. So that's a really tame flying collective range. stunt one or idle up one running -10 to +10 collective, and in stunt two, ±12 degree collective range. Again, symmetrical, 0 right at center stick or midpoint on your pitch curve. ±12 is about the most I can handle on this machine. You can go up to about 13 if you really want aggressive collective, but after that it just bogs down. But I find 12 even too much. But that's the beauty with collective pitch helicopters and computerized radios. You can cater everything on them to your flying style and what you feel comfortable with. Let's plug the motors back in, get outside, and let the heli do the talking. I'm shutting up. Thanks for watching, folks. We'll see you next time. Happy flights.